Hello, I'm Gunner Ritchie 1971 and I'm on in the North Bank. Today's video is North London Derby, the complete history. Before we get into it, do a little bit of homework. If you like this video, drop a like, share, comment. Interacting with you guys is what I like to do. Subscribe, hit the bell button to stay up to date with all our content. And so without further ado, let's get into the video proper. Two celebrated football clubs, one sprawling city, and a bitter rivalry that was forged not on the green pitch but in the smoky backrooms of football's authorities. What if I told you that one of the most hostile, deeply felt feuds in the entire sport wasn't sparked by a tackle or a controversial goal, but by a calculated business decision that moved one team directly into the heart of its enemy's territory? This is the story of how a simple relocation across London lit a fuse that has been burning for well over a century. This tale is about so much more than just football. It is a story steeped in geography and local identity, a narrative defined by accusations of betrayal and a deep-seated animosity that has been meticulously passed down from one generation to the next. It's a saga of two vastly different clubs whose paths didn't just cross but collided in the most explosive way imaginable, creating a derby that crackles with a unique and venomous energy, from the influential boardrooms to the roaring terraces, from the questionable votes to the ultimate act of player treason. This is the complete history of the North London Derby. Before the consuming hatred, before they were even acknowledged rivals, they were two complete strangers. To truly comprehend the fire that rages today, you must first understand the ingredients that created it. And back in the nascent days of the late 19th century, those ingredients were separated by many miles of city sprawl. In the year 1882, a group of schoolboys from the local Hotspur cricket club were looking for a way to stay fit and active during the cold winter months. They gathered under the flickering gaslight on a lamppost on Tottenham High Road and made a decision that would echo through history. They formed Hotspur FC. This was Tottenham, a district that then the part of the county of Middlesex, not yet officially absorbed into London itself. The name was a tribute to Harry Hotspur, the famous rebellious nobleman from Shakespeare's play Henry the Fourth. A truly fitting namesake for a club that would go on to build a formidable reputation for flair, style, and a relentless fighting spirit. They were, in essence, a Middlesex club, born directly out of the fabric of their community. This was Tottenham Hotspur. 4 years later, and miles away to the south, across the murky rivers waters of the River Thames in the industrial heartland of Woolwich, a very different kind of football club was taking shape. In 1886, a group of workers at the Royal Arsenal Munitions Factory, led by a determined Scotsman named David Danskin, decided to start their own team. They initially called themselves Dial Square, a name taken directly from one of the factory workshops. These were men of heavy industry, their identities not tied to a neighbourhood or a borough, but to their place of work. The club's very soul was forged in the smoke and steel of the armaments factory, a world away from the community fields of their future rivals. They soon evolved, becoming Royal Arsenal and then Woolwich Arsenal. Given this context, their first encounters barely registered as significant. Their very first meeting was a casual friendly played on a dark afternoon in November of 1887. The game had to be abandoned 15 minutes before full time due to the fading light, with Spurs holding a 2-1 lead. While they did eventually meet in a formal league game in 1909, there was no tangible animosity They were separated by the vastness of a city, a major river, and the very social fabric they were woven from. One was a club from Middlesex, the other a works team from the south. The very notion that they would be one day become enemies, the bitterest of enemies, would have sounded utterly ridiculous. They had no reason to dislike each other, because for all intents and purposes they lived in two completely different worlds. But one man's burning ambition was about to change everything forever. The year is 1913, and Woolwich Arsenal is a football club teetering on the brink of collapse. The initial novelty of professional football in the traditionally rugby-mad south of London had begun to wear off. Crowds at their manor ground were steadily dwindling, and to make matters worse, the club had just suffered relegation for the only time in its entire history. Financial survival looked increasingly unlikely. The club's chairman, the formidable and influential property developer Sir Henry Norris, knew he had to do something drastic. If his club were going to survive, let alone thrive, it had to move. Norris also held the position of chairman at Fulham. He first attempted to merge his two clubs into a single London super club, but the Football League flatly refused the proposal. So he turned his full attention back to Arsenal and began a meticulous search for a new home. He scouted potential sites all across London, searching for a location with excellent transport links that could attract the larger crowds the club so desperately needed to survive. His eyes eventually landed on a plot of land in Highbury, North London. The land was then being used as the recreation ground for St John's College of Divinity, but Norris saw it as the perfect spot. The nearby Gillespie Road underground station was a game changer, promising a steady flow of the fans that the club desperately craved. There was just one massive, unavoidable problem. Highbury was located only 4 miles from White Hart Lane, the home of Tottenham Hotspur. Norris knew full well that this would cause immense friction, but in his pursuit of survival and profit, he simply did not care. In 1913, he formally leased the land and immediately began building a new stadium designed by the era's most famous architect, Archibald Letch. The reaction from their new neighbours was both instant and absolutely furious. Tottenham Hotspur, the club from Middlesex, was outraged. They saw Arsenal's move not as a desperate act of survival, but as a hostile invasion. It was a blatant attempt to steal their supporters and encroach upon their territory. In a twist of irony, with Tottenham still administratively part of Middlesex, Arsenal's move actually made them the first Football League club to be geographically based in North London. Tottenham formally objected to the move, along with another local club, Clapton Orient, and a vocal group of Highbury residents pleading their case directly to the Football League's top brass. But Sir Henry Norris was an incredibly powerful and well-connected man. He skillfully argued that having more clubs in the area would generate more interest in football for everyone involved. The league's management committee, perhaps swayed by Norris's considerable influence and persuasive arguments, ultimately dismissed all of the objections and gave the controversial move their official blessing. In the summer of 1913, Woolwich Arsenal packed its bags, crossed the River Thames, and planted its flag deeply in what was considered enemy territory. The club unceremoniously dropped Woolwich from its name, becoming known simply as the Arsenal. The impact was immediate. Their first game at Highbury saw attendances more than double from their final season in the South. For Arsenal, the move was a masterstroke. It not only saved the club from financial ruin, but it also set it on a path to greatness. For Tottenham, it was a profound betrayal. A rival hadn't just been created through sporting competition, it had been artificially manufactured and dropped right on their doorstep. The spark had been lit. But the real, enduring hatred was yet to come. If Arsenal's strategic move to Highbury was the spark that lit the fuse, then the events of 1919 were a full-scale explosion. This was the moment that twisted local resentment into a deep, venomous and lasting feud that would come to divide the two clubs forever. League football had been suspended for the duration of the First World War. In the last full season played before the conflict, 1914 to 15, Tottenham had finished rock bottom of the First Division and were, by the rules of the day, relegated. Arsenal, meanwhile, had finished in a distinctly average fifth place in the Second Division. When football finally resumed in 1919, the Football League made a decision to expand the top division from 20 to 22 clubs. Logic dictated a simple and fair solution. The top two teams from the second division would be promoted as champions, and the two teams that had been relegated before the war, Chelsea and Tottenham, would be reinstated to fill the new spots. Chelsea were indeed saved, partly due to a widespread sympathy over a match-fixing scandal involving other clubs that had unfairly contributed to their demotion. That left one spot open. Everyone, especially the long-suffering supporters of Tottenham Hotspur, assumed it would be theirs. But Sir Henry Norris had other, far more ambitious plans. Despite Arsenal's unremarkable mid-table finish, he launched an audacious and aggressive political campaign to get Arsenal, not Tottenham, elected into the newly expanded top flight. The fate of both clubs would come down to a vote at the Football League's annual general meeting. Norris, who by this time was also a member of Parliament and a notoriously shrewd operator, worked his Machiavellian magic behind the scenes. He was widely accused of conspiring with his powerful friend John McKenna, who happened to be the chairman of both Liverpool and the Football League itself. While direct evidence of backroom deals or bribery was never definitively proven, the circumstances surrounding the vote were and remain deeply suspicious. At the decisive meeting, Norris brazenly argued that Arsenal deserved a promotion for their long service to Football League, citing their status as the first Southern club to have joined the league. It was a historically shaky but powerfully persuasive argument. When the votes were finally counted, the result was a bombshell that sent shockwaves through English football. Arsenal received a commanding 18 votes. Tottenham, the team that was supposed to be reinstated, received just 8. Arsenal, the team that had invaded their patch just a few years earlier and had finished 5th in the division below them, were promoted at their expense. Tottenham were unceremoniously cast down. For Spurs fans, the sense of injustice was overwhelming and absolute. They felt they had been robbed, not on the field of play, but in a smoke-filled ballroom through corrupt, back-channel dealings. This was the true, undeniable birth of a derby's visceral hatred. The 1913 move had been a bitter land dispute. The 1919 vote was an outright declaration of war. In a twist of fate, Arsenal have remained in the top flight of English football ever since, establishing an unbroken record. For their fans, it is a point of immense pride. For Tottenham fans, it remains a painful reminder of the day their rivals, in their eyes, brazenly stole their rightful place at the top table. With the battle lines now irrevocably drawn, the first on-pitch encounters following the 1919 controversy were bound to be hostile affairs. The first ever competitive North London League derby took place on January 15th, 1921 at White Hart Lane. The air inside the stadium was thick with palpable anger and resentment stemming from the promotion affair. Spurs won the match 2-1, a small but incredibly sweet measure of revenge for their supporters. The animosity wasn't just confined to the stands, it spilled onto the pitch. A fixture in September 22 was so violent and badly tempered from both sides that both clubs were officially censured by the Football Association, who went as far as threatening to make them play future matches behind closed doors. It was a clear and early sign that this was no ordinary fixture. It was something far more personal. As the 20s wore on, the fortunes of the two North London clubs began to dramatically diverge. In 1925, Arsenal made a landmark move, poaching the visionary manager Herbert Chapman from Huddersfield Town. Chapman was a footballing genius, a revolutionary tactician and innovator who would go on to change not just the destiny of Arsenal, but the very fabric of English football itself. Under Chapman's brilliant leadership, Arsenal became the undisputed dominant force of the 1930s. He introduced groundbreaking new tactics like the WM formation, championed the iconic white sleeves on Arsenal's red shirts for better visibility, and pushed for the introduction of numbered shirts. He signed legendary players like Cliff Baston and the creative maestro Alex James, and the club became famously known as the Bank of England club for its overwhelming success and financial might. Chapman's first major trophy came with the 1930 FA Cup, which was quickly followed by Arsenal's first ever league title in 1931, a season which they scored a staggering club record 127 goals. While Arsenal were busy collecting the glittering array of trophies, Spurs fans could only watch on with gritted teeth. A crushing 6-0 demolition of Spurs by Arsenal in March 1935 remains the largest margin of victory in the derby's long history, and served as a brutal illustration of the gulf in class that had opened up between them. Herbert Chapman died tragically from pneumonia in 1934, but the dynasty had meticulously built continued its reign, winning 3 consecutive league titles between 1933 and 1935. For Arsenal, it was a true golden age. For Tottenham, it was a miserable decade of watching their brash, incredibly successful, and in their view, illegitimate neighbours completely dominate English football. The rivalry was now not just about territory, but about success and status. Arsenal had all the glory, Tottenham were left with a burning sense of grievance. After the conclusion of World War II, the pendulum of power in North London began to swing back and forth, making the on-pitch rivalry even more intense and unpredictable. Tottenham, who had spent so long in Arsenal's considerable shadow, finally emerged as a formidable force to be reckoned with. The early 1950s belonged entirely to Spurs under the astute management of Arthur Rowe. Their famous and innovative push and run side captured the First Division Championship in '51, marking their first ever top flight league title. A generation later, the cockerel was finally crowing loudly once again. This period of success reached its glorious peak in the 1960-61 season, when the team managed by the legendary Bill Nicholson achieved the unthinkable. They won the league and FA Cup double, a monumental feat that no other club in the 20th century had managed to accomplish. Featuring iconic players like the elegant captain Danny Blanchard and the prolific goal scorer Jimmy Greaves, this Spurs side was rightfully regarded as one of the greatest in the history of English football. They followed up this domestic triumph by becoming the first British club to win a major European trophy, the Cup Winners' Cup, in 1963. But in a rivalry as bitter and deep-rooted as this one side's moment of ultimate triumph often means utter despair for the other, and Arsenal was about to deliver the most painful humiliation imaginable. The date was May 3rd, 1971. Arsenal travelled to White Hart Lane for the final, decisive game of the season, needing either a win or a goalless draw to clinch the league title away from Leeds United. The tension inside the stadium was unbearable. Spurs were utterly desperate to stop their arch rivals from achieving the ultimate insult, winning the championship on their own hallowed turf. The match was a cagey, brutal and tight affair, remaining scoreless as the clock ticked down. But in the 88th minute, Arsenal's Ray Kennedy rose majestically to meet a cross and powered a thunderous header past the despairing Spurs keeper. The Arsenal end of the stadium erupted into a scene of pure pandemonium. The rest of White Hart Lane fell into a deep, stunned and agonising silence. Arsenal had won the game 1-0. They had won the league at White Hart Lane. Tried to even more salt into the gaping wound. Just 5 days later, Arsenal went on to beat Liverpool at Wembley to complete their own historic double, perfectly matching the incredible feat their neighbours had achieved just a decade earlier. For Arsenal fans, it remains perhaps the sweetest victory in their club's history. For Spurs fans, it was a living nightmare made real. The balance of power had shifted violently back across North London in the most dramatic and painful way imaginable. The 1980s and 1990s saw the rivalry escalate into high-stakes media frenzy and globally televised conflict that we know today. In 1983, Spurs gave Arsenal one of their most humiliating defeats ever, a stunning and comprehensive 5-0 thrashing at White Hart Lane that is still celebrated by their fans. But as is the nature of this feud, the pendulum soon swung back. The single defining moment of this era arrived on April the 14th, 1991. For the first time in their long histories, the two clubs were drawn to face each other in an FA Cup semi-final at Wembley Stadium. The occasion was monumental. Arsenal were the dominant team in the country, chasing a second domestic double, and went into the game heavy, overwhelming favourites. But Spurs had Paul Gascoigne, the mercurial Gazza. A generational English talent was just returning from injury. Just 5 minutes into the game, Spurs won a free kick fully 35 yards from good goal. It seemed far too distant to pose a genuine threat. Gascoigne stepped up and with a combination of raw power and breathtaking audacity, unleashed an unstoppable rocket of a shot that flew past the outstretched arm of England goalkeeper David Seaman. Wembley erupted. The goal was an act of pure, unadulterated genius. Inspired by this moment of magic, Spurs went on to win the match 3-1, sensationally denying their rivals the cherished double. For Spurs fans, the day was so special, so cathartic, that they christened it St. Hotspur Day. It was glorious victory against all odds, a moment of individual brilliance that perfectly defined the passionate, unpredictable, and often illogical nature of the derby. The arrival of a relatively unknown French manager Arsène Wenger at Arsenal in 1996 would once again tip the scales of power dramatically. Wenger's revolutionary approach to diet, training, and tactics ushered in an era of unprecedented and stylish success. including domestic trouble doubles in both 98 and 2002. But the most inflammatory moment of entire Bang era wasn't another trophy, it wasn't a transfer, an act so unthinkable, so treacherous in the eyes of Tottenham's faithful, that it would pour a gallon of petrol on the already raging fire of the North London derby. The year is 2001. Sol Campbell is the revered captain of Tottenham Hotspur, the defensive rock, their leader, their homegrown hero. His contract is expiring, and after months of publicly assuring the fans that he would stay, sign a new deal, the unthinkable happens. In one of the most shocking and controversial transfers in the history of football, Sol Campbell walks out on Tottenham and signs for their most hated rivals, Arsenal, on the free transfer. The sense of betrayal felt by Tottenham supporters was absolute and visceral. This wasn't just any player leaving for a rival club. This was their captain, their talisman, joining the enemy for nothing. From that moment on to the Spurs faithful, he was known by one name and one name only, Judas. The move took the rivalry's already intense hatred to a new, toxic and deeply personal level. Campbell's first return to White Hart Lane in November 2001 was an event that transcended football. The atmosphere inside the ground was a terrifying cauldron of pure loathing. Thousands of white balloons bearing the word Judas were held aloft by the furious home fans. The verbal abuse directed at him was relentless, deafening, and lasted the entire 90 minutes. Despite the immense suffocating pressure, Campbell delivered an outstanding performance. The match ended in a 1-1 draw, but the result was almost secondary. The day was about one thing, the betrayal. For Campbell, the move was an immediate and resounding success. In his very first season with Arsenal, he won the Premier League and FA Cup double. But the ultimate insult, the final twist to the knife, was still to come. On April 25th, 2004, history repeated itself in the most painful way for Spurs. Just as they had done back in 1971, Arsenal travelled back to White Hart Lane, needing only a single point to win the Premier League title. Wenger's legendary Invincibles team, unbeaten all season, stormed into an early 2-0 lead. Spurs bravely fought back to earn a 2-2 draw with a late penalty, but it was too little, too late. The final whistle blew, and for the second time in their history, the Arsenal players celebrated winning the league on their rival's home pitch. And there, at the heart of their defence, celebrating with them, was the man Spurs fans once called their captain, Sol Campbell. This era also produced some of the most chaotic and thrilling derbies ever played. A 9-goal thriller in November 2004 saw Arsenal clinch a 5-4 victory at White Hart Lane, which remains the highest scoring North London derby in history. 4 years later, in a staggering 4-4 draw at the Emirates, Spurs can score 2 goals in the dying minutes to seal an improbable point. The Wenger years cemented Arsenal's dominance for a generation. But the Sol Campbell affair ensured that the hatred between the two clubs only grew deeper and more intense. For 2 entire decades, under the reign of Arsene Wenger, finishing above Tottenham in the league table was a cherished annual tradition for Arsenal fans. They even gave it a name, St. Totteringham's Day, a specific calendar date on which it became mathematically impossible for Spurs to finish above them. First noted on the fan website in 2002, the concept quickly became a mainstream symbol for their sustained dominance. For 21 consecutive seasons without fail, St. Totteringham's day arrived, much to the delight of the Gunners and the despair of Spurs. But in the mid 2010s, the ground beneath North London began to shift. The arrival of manager Mauricio Pochettino transformed a talented but inconsistent Tottenham team into a young, dynamic, and formidable force, turning them into genuine Premier League title contenders. The longly established balance of power was finally decisively tilting. The 2016-17 season proved to be the definitive turning point. On April 30th, 2017, the two teams met for the last ever North London derby at the old White Hart Lane Stadium. The stakes were immense. A win for Spurs would not only give them the bragging rights, but mathematically guarantee that they would finish above Arsenal for the first time in 22 years. Goals from Dele Alli and a Harry Kane penalty secured a commanding 2-0 victory. The power shift was complete. St Tottenham's Day was officially cancelled. Spurs went on to finish above Arsenal for 6 straight seasons, a remarkable run that established a new local era. This era was defined by homegrown heroes, most notably Harry Kane, who was famously released by Arsenal's youth academy as a boy and went on to become the all-time leading goalscorer in the history of the North London derby. The rivalry found a new spectacular home in Tottenham's magnificent new 62,850-seater stadium, a grand structure that stood as a powerful symbol of their modern ambition. While Arsenal struggled to find their identity in the post-Wenger era, Spurs competed in a Champions League final. Yet this rivalry never stands still. Under the management of Mikel Arteta, a former Arsenal captain himself, the Gunners have re-emerged as a major force, finally breaking Tottenham's streak and finishing above them once again in the 22-23 season. The battle for supremacy in North London is once again a tense neck-and-neck affair. It's no longer a simple story of dominant force and a resentful underdog. It is a clash of two genuine heavyweights with massive global fan bases, state-of-the-art stadiums, and a shared desire to be the top club in the city. From a humble lamppost on Tottenham High Road and a bustling munitions factory in the industrial village, two great football clubs began their separate journeys. For decades their paths barely crossed, but a single calculated decision in 1913 to move a struggling South London club into the very heart of the North ignited a fire that has raged with incredible intensity for over a century. It is a rivalry fundamentally built on moments of profound conflict. The territorial invasion of 1913, the perceived political injustice of the 1919 promotion vote, and the ultimate personal betrayal of Sol Campbell's transfer in 2001. These are not just historical footnotes, they are the sacred foundational texts of this bitter and enduring feud. It's a story of dramatically shifting power from Arsenal's untouchable dynasty in the 1930s to Tottenham's double winning glory in the 60s. It is a story of ultimate humiliation of winning the league championship on your enemy's home soil. A spectacular feat Arsenal managed not just once, but twice. It's a story of breathtaking individual genius of a Paul Gascoigne free kick that defied the logic, and a Thierry Henry celebration that dripped with glorious contempt. Today, the North London derby is a polished global spectacle broadcast to hundreds of millions around the world, but beneath the glittering surface of the modern Premier League, the old ghosts remain. The rivalry is still, at its core, intensely local, a fierce battle for pride, for identity, and for the undeniable right to claim the streets of North London. It is more than a football match, it's a living story of a city, a complex history, and a powerful hatred that shows no sign of ever fading away. What is your most memorable North London derby moment? A stunning goal, a controversial decision, a last minute winner? Let us know in the comments section below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of football's greatest rivalries, be sure to like and subscribe for more complete histories. Thank you for watching. Cheers!